Chapter 409. Thea sent the guest away and immediately summoned Death Knell and Poison Ivy. She asked them to take 300 mercenaries to Switzerland, where the headquarters of the Cold Flame Church was located deep in the Alps. Contact with the Sky Eye Society was becoming more frequent. All kinds of black technology equipment were secretly taken out in the name of the committee. That's right. Thea was cautious and prepared for both sides. The other side was reasonable and would answer all her questions. The probability of this happening was very small. The rest was to beat the other side into submission. If the other side had any resentment, she would directly kill them. A group of cultists, no matter how she looked at it, would not help the future of the Earth at all. If the other side lacked magic and attack power, she would directly crush them. If the magic was strange and secretive, she would use black technology to force them. When it was close to the end of the day, the assistant reported to her, "A Mr. Barry Allen wants to see you." Thea did not know that Oliver had told Barry a lot about her. She just felt surprised that he would come to see her for no reason. Let him in. 3 minutes later, Barry Allen, who was a bit familiar with Thea, greeted her. She had to admit that this man was really charming. It was not his appearance that was charming, but his temperament was very outstanding. Thea had seen a lot of superheroes, and Barry's temperament was like a big boy with sunshine. Different from the Sunshine Superman, Superman had a kind of radiant temperament. According to Luther's words, Superman was like God walking on Earth. You would not think that he would eat, sleep, chat, or do other mundane things. You could only feel his tolerance of all things. Barry was much more amiable than Superman. The two of them chatted casually for a while, and their relationship was greatly improved. "I heard from Ali that you are in charge of the alien project. Is it true? Are there really aliens in the world?" Barry felt that they were almost done chatting and finally got to his topic. Thea was a little surprised. She did not expect that he was thinking about aliens. What if he was hot-blooded and drove an alien spaceship to the universe to find the murderer of his mother? Would she still want this timeline? She had to dispel his idea. Thea did not want to face hundreds of lightning bolts in the cracks of time. Thea turned her office computer 180 degrees. "These are the 7 alien races that have landed on Earth. I can't tell you where they are. Their body composition, blood concentration, living habits, we've done a rough calculation. I can show it to you." Barry Allen took over the laptop. He didn't even bother to express his gratitude as he looked at it carefully. Although he wasn't as good as Batman and Luther, he had a lot of knowledge, and it didn't look like he was struggling with the data. The more he looked, the more he frowned. Barry felt that these aliens were too weak. Judging from the data, some of the aliens were not even as strong as the humans on Earth. This was too different from what he had imagined before coming here, where they could fly and burrow into the ground. "Dr. Quinn, do you think there might be an alien that has transcended the constraints of the body and moved around like lightning?" Thea waved her hand casually. "You and my brother are friends. Just call me Thea. As for your question, I can only say that it's impossible. The body is the foundation. No matter how small a creature is, even if it's a microorganism, it has a form. We live in a material world. This is the conclusion drawn by countless generations of human scientists. Please don't blaspheme it." Looking at Thea's serious face, Barry, who was also a scientific researcher, was in awe. This was the real demeanor of a scholar. For a moment, he felt that he was a bit stubborn. In fact, Thea secretly criticized herself. As a magic user, she pretended to be a scientist and talked about the great power of modern science. She was also helpless. The power of speed itself was against the rules of physics. Not to mention herself, even Newton couldn't explain it clearly. As for the lightning you mentioned, it's even against the laws of physics. As fast as lightning, it's just an adjective. It's too fast. Air friction alone can't solve the problem. So the situation you said is not caused by aliens. You have to be confident. Aliens are not stronger than us. Now, if the aliens on Earth don't have our help, none of them will survive. Don't believe the nonsense in those movies. Subconsciously, you automatically put the aliens in a very strong place. This is not right. In order to dispel Barry Allen's idea, Thea belittled the aliens. In her words, the hundreds of thousands of aliens were no different from Syrian refugees. If they were happy, they would be given something to eat. If they were unhappy, they would go up and kick them. Barry was a little confused. Were aliens so bad? Although he was kind, his identity as an Earthling still made him proud. When he heard Thea's speech advocating the invincibility of Earthlings, he didn't feel any disgust. Feeling that the doubts in his heart had been solved, he directly said goodbye and left. After pretending to be a believer of the Church of Science for half a day and fooling Barry Allen, Thea began to busy herself with other things. She didn't know how many days the trip to Europe would take. The affairs of the committee could be handled at any time. The heroes here in Star City still needed her to make some preparations. Each of them was given a portable energy defense ring. When it was activated, it could withstand the attack of an M4A1 magazine or 3 rifle grenades. Tommy returned from being poisoned and learned his lesson. Although he didn't know where the god's blood and gene optimization fluid came from, he still started to inject them. She was afraid that they would be seriously injured and she wouldn't be able to treat them in time. She also prepared a healing arrow for each of them. The arrow barrel contained a large amount of nutrients and a small amount of adrenaline. Even if they were poisoned or seriously injured, no matter what, they would still be able to run back on their own. 2 days later, Thea activated the advanced invisibility spell on Merlin's sword and went to Switzerland alone to meet up with Death Knell and the others. In the end, Midnight Daddy couldn't resist the temptation of power and put on the replica light ring. The emotional energy helped him to clear the excess magic impurities in his body. It seemed that the total amount of magic was reduced by 1/3. In fact, the magic application was more flexible and varied. Many witchcraft that required skills in the past could now be performed. It could be said that his strength had increased by a lot. Not bad. How are the preparations of our people? Thea looked at Midnight Daddy and nodded to express her approval. She then turned to ask Death Knell. Death Knell was the best at killing and arson in other people's homes. After many years of being a mercenary, he had heard a little about the Cold Flame Vatican. In his opinion, these people who played with magic were nothing much. Moreover, he had brought along elite soldiers with the best weapons in the world. Death Knell's expression couldn't be seen through the red and black mask, but his voice was filled with killing intent. Everything is ready. We can set off at any time. Good. Let's go. Remember, we are here to ask questions. Pay attention to your etiquette. Thea pulled Poison Ivy and Midnight Daddy into her invisibility spell. She looked at the 300 soldiers armed to the teeth outside the tent. There were 5 sets of exoskeleton armor and 2 M270 multi-barrel rocket launchers. Chapter 410. Thea's subordinates didn't really believe her so-called etiquette. Death Knell snorted, Poison Ivy chuckled, and Father Midnight thought of his own experience and looked at the valley in the distance with his hands clasped behind his back. Under the cover of the night, the group walked very quietly. The multi-barreled rocket launchers were left at the campsite. Its attack range was enough to hit the cultists. Thea didn't want the normal mercenaries to know of her existence, so the scene was completely under Death Knell's command. She made it clear that they were going to exterminate the cultists. The mercenaries didn't reject this mission. They could kill the good guys and beat the bad guys as long as they paid. The people of the Cold Flame Church might be good at magic, but when it came to building their base, they weren't even considered amateurs. Plus, they were used to being arrogant. They were the only ones who found trouble with others. No one ever found trouble with them. The group was vigilant for a long time, but there wasn't even a night patrol. The cultists occupied an ancient medieval castle. It was made of bricks and the thick wooden door gave off a historical vibe. At least, Thea felt that it was more than enough to film a night legend. Go knock on the door. Death Knell finally remembered Thea's order to pay attention to etiquette. He pointed at one of his subordinates and said in a low voice. The subordinate was a little confused. Usually, in such a situation, didn't they throw a grenade and then kick open the door and kill their way in? Now that they were fully armed, they had to knock on someone's door? Although he was puzzled, the subordinate didn't dare to disobey Death Knell's order. He went up awkwardly and knocked on the wooden door of the ancient castle. Thea looked at the scene of her men nervously aiming their rifles at the door and almost laughed out loud. If the people inside shouted, "Who is it?" and the people outside said, "Send warmth," it would be even more heartwarming. Unfortunately, the people inside seemed to be dead. The mercenaries knocked on the door for 2 minutes, but no one made a sound. Others couldn't see Thea, but they could still see her with their imitation light rings. Death Knell gave Thea a look. What should they do next? Activate our Italian cannon, no, M270 multi-barreled rocket launchers. Fire 2 shots first, Thea said through the light rings. They looked at her blankly. Was this what you meant by etiquette? Death Knell nodded silently. There was no such word as fear in his dictionary. He gestured for his men to leave before taking out his walkie-talkie and ordering the M270 at the rear to blast open the door with 2 shots. Whoosh! Whoosh! 2 M26A1 long-range rocket launchers, leaving behind a trail of red flames, directly hit the wooden door. When the rocket was only 2 centimeters away from the wooden door, a metallic copper light flashed, and the rocket was directly blocked. The violent explosion made the copper light flash desperately. When the smoke dissipated, everyone found that the door was intact, as if the 2 rockets had never appeared. The magic defense here was quite intelligent. Thea's interest was piqued. Knocking on doors wasn't affected, but when the energy reached a certain level, it would activate defensive magic. She had to admit that the original designer was a genius. However, it was impossible to stop Thea with just these 2 moves. Did you see that? The metallic luster on the door has dimmed significantly. Continue attacking, Thea ordered Death Knell. The M270 carried 12 rockets. Death Knell continued to order the rear to fire. At the same time, the mercenaries who carried anti-tank missiles also ordered them to fire freely. They didn't need to be restricted to the door. The opponent's defense barrier was a hole, so they could hit anywhere. In an instant, all kinds of rockets, missiles, grenades, and incendiary bombs were launched. The cold flame Vatican's defense barrier was indeed extraordinary. Could even be called an outstanding piece of art. However, the masters focused their attention on the spellcasters and ignored the crystallization of human technology. If Thea were to attack their barrier by herself, she would need to spend a lot of time to identify the magic array, analyze and crack it. Even with the help of the Eye of Horus, she would need half a day to tear open a hole in the barrier. However, now that she was leading a large army, there was no need for her to waste her time. Those missiles and rockets were only a few $100,000 USD. She spent millions a day researching power armors, so this amount of money was nothing. The ultimate masterpiece of human magic, the last piece of technology, the almost impenetrable enchantment, was finally broken by a group of soldiers. The heavy wooden door was blown to pieces. Death Knell held a grenade launcher in his left hand and a long sword in his right. He was the first to walk in. The group walked through a corridor that was not too long and came to the front yard. The night was here, and the low trees around were blown by the breeze. There was a murderous aura in the dark, and they could faintly hear the sounds of fighting coming from the building. What was going on? Everyone looked at each other in confusion. They had just come in. Was there another group of passionate guests inside? Regardless of whether there was a fight or a dance party inside, it had nothing to do with Thea. She was here to get information. She signaled everyone to continue walking. With a click sound, the floor in the middle of the front yard quickly flipped up. Under the twisting of the mechanism, a white jade statue of a middle-aged man as tall as a person slowly rose up. The statue was wearing a top hat and a suit. He held a cane in his left hand, and his right arm was stretched out at shoulder level. His 5 fingers were spread open, and he faced everyone from afar. Isufer! The voice of the statue sounded hollow and powerless, as if it were coming from somewhere underground. Although the voice was weak, the effect was surprisingly good. Many of the mercenaries took more than 10 steps back, and some even walked to the door in one breath. The originally neat formation was suddenly messed up. Death Knell and Midnight's father each took a step back. One of them relied on his willpower, while the other relied on magic to stabilize their bodies. Unknown vines crawled out from Poison Ivy's feet and firmly held onto her ankle. She did not take a step back. Thea also felt the unknown energy affecting her judgment. But now that her magic willpower had reached an extremely high level, she was able to break free from the magic's influence with a little effort. Irony magic. Thea could not help but look at the statue. If she was not wrong, this should be Zatanna's father. She did not know what method he used, but he actually left a trace of his mental strength and a small amount of magic in the statue, which was used to defend against all non-members of the Vatican. This spell was really ingenious. Magic was actually the power of language at the beginning. The father and daughter's irony magic had developed this subject to the extreme, and they had also created a new interpretation of it. With the help of magic, the impossible became possible, and the illusory became reality. This was the magical version of using 4 tails to achieve 1,000 caddies. A talent born 1,000 years later. Thea sighed. This guy lived in the Middle Ages, an era when the natural environment was still filled with magic. His achievements might not be lower than Merlin's. She did not know if Zatanna's father had developed the irony magic himself. She only remembered that Constantine and Nightmare Nurse could also use a few sentences. Judging from this, it should not be a bloodline magic. The old man should have some notes in the Vatican, right? After she finished her questioning, should she ask for the notes for reference?